Hey math class. Okay, so today this first video we're going to talk about how fractions and decimals are related, because that's the most important thing that you can remember. They are related. They're talking about numbers smaller than 1, but greater than 0, right? So tiny, tiny numbers, just like with fractions. They just look a little bit different than fractions, so they're probably cousins, right? They're family, they're related, but they look different. So when I have my fraction, right, my top number is like the part, and the whole, or the bottom number, tells me how many pieces to break my whole amount up into. So if you look at this picture, I have 8, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 8 little rectangles in this picture. And if I were to represent my fraction using this picture, I would color in 3 of them. Right? So this is like fraction day 1. We kind of talked about, this with M&Ms and with some pictures. This would be the picture representation of a fraction, of this fraction. So in decimal language, though, fractions are written a little bit differently, because it's still a fraction of a number. But, you know, here, like, I can have anything on the bottom of this fraction. But when I talk about decimals, I have to talk about them as either fractions, and let me draw you a picture here, that have 10 on the bottom, or fractions that have 100, or fractions that have like 1,000 on the bottom. And it could have 10,000. It could have 1,000,000, but it's, oh, that one got a little crazy. It's always going to be like a 1 and some zeros. And quite often, this is going to be the one that we talk about. This one out of, or, you know, out of 100 pieces that something is broken into. So let's look at some examples of that. I made them on the computer here. Let me show you this one first. So this would be a picture of a shape, you know, with 100, because I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares this way, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 squares that way, right? So if I wanted to look at a picture and write it as a decimal, I could do that. How many squares in this picture are shaded in? I'm going to grab a different pen here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 25, okay? And you can kind of see that. Now that we look at this and we know that there's 10 in a row, right? There's 10, here's 5. So this is 25. So I could write this as a fraction, and if I was doing that, it would look like this, right? 25 out of 100. And then, of course, I know from fraction land that I could reduce that, but for now I'm just going to leave it. But I could also write it as hundredths. Okay, so we're going to be practicing the language of fractions, because it really does have this weird language. And I have a handout that I'll give you that sort of talks about the place value. But when we're talking about something that's over 100, it's really going to mean 2 spots behind the decimal point. Well, so why 2, you might ask? Because you have 2 zeros. Or I don't know if it's because you have 2 zeros right there, but it definitely makes it easier to remember. So if I have a fraction over 100, and I'm looking at a picture that has some number of pieces colored in out of 100 possible pieces, I'm going to write it with 2 spots behind my decimal point, okay? And the numbers I'm going to write behind my decimal point are just these guys, 25. So this means the same as this one. Let's look at another example. This is definitely one of those things that lots of examples probably help. Okay, so this guy, he's got a lot of them covered, doesn't he? So here's one row of 10, here's another row of 10, here's another row of 10, a 4th row, there's a 5th row, and a 6th row. So this right here, like I'm at 60, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay? So again, so I have 66 total here. Maybe I'll write that in so we can see this is 66, right? I'm going to write it either as a fraction or as a decimal with 1, 2 spots behind the decimal point. Okay? Let's look at another example. And this one I'm trying to be a little bit tricky. Okay, so here's I have 10, there's 20. Maybe I'll write it that way. Here's 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, right? And then I have 71, 72, 73, 74, and this is like a half, right? This is 74 and a half. So I would really write this like that. But if you ask me, that's totally confusing, right? And so one thing that you want to remember is that half is 0.5. And why is it 0.5? If I colored in half of this thing, I'm going to grab a blue pen here so you can kind of see. So this has 100, right? 100 squares, and I want to color in half of it. It's going to be this like whole section right here, right? It's taking me a lot longer to color this in than I thought it would. And how many squares is that? You can hopefully know this. You could do the math. I could divide 100 in half, could divide it by 2, right? But here you can see we have 10, 20, 30, 40, and 50. Right? So 50 over 100, that's the same as a half, but it's also the same as 0.50, okay? 0.50. So a half is the same as 0.50, and so that's what I'm going to write with this guy. But it's not just going to be this 0.5 behind the decimal point, because first I have 74. So here's my decimal point, and I have 74, but then I have this little half a guy right here. So I'm just going to add a 5 to that. And really what this means is like if I took a ruler and like divided each of these rows up, I would end up with 1,000. It would be just like an insane amount. But see how I'm dividing each of these up? And if I did that for the whole thing, it would be 1,000 little squares here. And I could write this as 745 over 1,000 because I would have all of this shaded would total 745,000 little tiny squares. So, and as you see here, 1, 2, 3 zeros behind the decimal point, 1, 2, 3 zeros behind the decimal point. But that's a lot. That's just crazy, right? Let's look at some that are maybe a little bit easier because I could also draw my picture like, where did my picture go? Here it is, like this, right? So this is the same picture as right here. It's the same square. It's just I've removed the lines going this way, and I've broken my 100 into just 10. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 pieces. Because remember how I was saying I could have 10 on the base of something too. And so let's look at some pictures of those. Because I think that it's kind of a lot easier. So here, 1, 2, 3, right? Out of 10. If I wrote that as a fraction, it would be this. If I want to write it as a decimal, it would be that. 1, 0, so 1 spot behind the decimal point. Okay? Let's look at another example here. What about this one? Curiouser and curiouser. Because look at this picture. Doesn't this picture look a lot like this picture that we just did? It is. Except that this one I said was 50 over 100, and this one is going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 strips, right, out of 10. And that one spot behind the decimal, right there, 1 0, so one spot behind the decimal, it tells me they actually make the same picture. So how weird is that? 0.50 is the same as 0.5. Let's look at another example here. And this one, you should be able to look at it and say, gosh, that's a fraction it's almost all the way filled up. This is almost all the way colored in. Most of my whole will be taken up. And that's good that you see it that way. How many rows do we have colored in here? 8, 9. So 9/10, right? 1 0, so one spot behind the decimal point, and I just fill that with 9. And that's how I say this too, 9/10. So hopefully kind of relating these fractions to the decimals hasn't been confusing. We're going to talk about place value in the next video, and then you'll watch an example with Sol Khan, Juin 1.